So, hello y'all. My name is a good way to start off a presentation. Today I'm going to be talking to you about the history of front-end frameworks. This is actually, I feel that it's a pretty important talk, not because I'm presenting it, only because the material that I will be going over today really does help. It helps explain why things are the way they are now with JavaScript. You know, like I'm assuming there are some developers out there that go on Stack Overflow and you know, as they're looking for the answer, they see jQuery. And they're like, what's jQuery? How does that fall into React? Or, you know, they talk about state. Like, what is state? Like, how? Well, I'm hoping tonight we'll be able to, or I'll be able to explain that and help answer some of those questions you may have. So, first of all, I wanted to thank the Houston React Meetup group for allowing me to present tonight. And also want to thank y'all for coming out. The last thing that I want is for someone in this room to walk away thinking that, you know, man, that was a waste of time. So I really, I tried to, or I made this presentation with the mindset that there are, you know, many types of developers in this room, from, you know, developers that are self-learning, developers that are currently in boot camps, to, you know, developers that have been doing this for decades now. So I really feel that people, or everyone here, will walk away with something. Another housekeeping, or I guess, want to tell y'all tonight, we are recording tonight's presentation, so in case that you missed something, or if you want to follow up on some of the topics I'm going to be talking about, know that I will be posting it on the Meetup group, either later on this weekend, or maybe even tonight, I don't know yet. Make sure I'll go over everything. And then also, since another thing I want to mention, we can hold all questions to the end, just so that way we can kind of have like a Q&A group discussion on some of the questions y'all may have. So with that, let's get started. Oh, I think I need to click on the presentation. There we go. So as I mentioned, my name is Fabian Buentello. Plot twist, I'm actually an iOS developer at Chai1. Yeah, fooled y'all. At Chai1 here in Houston, we're a digital innovation agency. We work with, most of our clients are in the enterprise space. And what's really cool is because I work on those type of projects, I come across some really interesting problems that a lot of average developers won't come across. So things like, you know, some of the topics I'll be talking about today, things like architecture, those topics are, before I didn't know anything about it, now I'm very, very comfortable with them. And then also, okay, so as far as my loves, JavaScript, Swift, and accidentally hit the spacebar twice. But this is going to be a Ben Stiller theme presentation. I wanted to have some fun with it. And so I felt, you know, earlier this week I came across a Ben Stiller GIF, and I'm like, yes, this is what I want to have in a presentation. Like, I could really make a storyline with Ben Stiller. It's not that he's my favorite actor or anything. He just has some really funny movies. So hopefully, you know, if you don't walk away with something in the presentation, you at least walk away wanting to see one of his movies, right? And so I'm gonna get you one more time. There you go. So some of the questions you might be asking yourself, you know, what is Ajax? What does state mean? What is this thing people say is MVC? What is that? I don't know. Why are there so many frameworks? And then also, what is ECMAScript? Like, how does all this tie in together? So, if you have some of those questions, great. I really hope that I answer them, and if not, afterwards I can answer them, or I provide you the tools to, you know, find those answers. So let's go over our agenda. We're going to first, foremost, what is JavaScript and why? Why does it exist? Then we're going to talk about before the before time. And with that, we're going to be talking about web versions, ECMAScript, the browser wars. It's a really interesting battle. It happened, you know, took place in the mid-90s, or mid-90s to the early 2000s. A lot of casualties. Then afterwards, we're going to talk about the before time. And then, which we're going to be talking about server-side rendering and client-side rendering. Now, one thing I wanted to mention, the material that we're going to be going over in these two sections are in no particular order. It's just information that you need to have. Just because, you know, web versions come before ECMAScript doesn't mean that it happened before. It's just, you know, information that you need, that I would want for the audience audience to know before we get to our next section, which is the framework era. All right. So I really had some fun with this section here, and I realized like we had all these battles or wars in between these frameworks, right? And if no one gives them a name, like I'm going to, and I'm going to name them whatever I want to call them, right? So I'm going to call the first war First Blood, right? This is going to be your jQueries, your Mootool, Dojo. Then someone can think of, or if you can already think of what the next war is going to be, the kind of got cut off there, but it's the monolithic melee. Okay, I try to have some fun with them, and then last is going to be the clash of the components. So these are all wars. Right now we're currently in the third war. I don't know if you know this, but the first two happened, and if you missed it, don't worry, I'm going to recap what you missed out on, all right? And then after that, what's next? Like, okay, Fabian, we just had these 3 wars. We're in the middle of the third one. I'm tired. What's coming down the pipeline? This is actually going to be my opinion. So, as I mentioned a few slides ago, I'm an iOS developer. So, my opinion, I don't really have a lot of weight behind it. But from my observations, what I've seen, I feel I kind of have an idea on where we're going. Next, we're going to have the follow-up topics. These are just going to be, this is going to be a slide that's going to have everything that I talked about briefly, along with names, some videos that are some must-watch videos if you're a JavaScript developer, especially a React developer. And then lastly, we're going to have questions. Sound good? So, first, what is JavaScript and why? So it was created in 1995 by Brendan, I believe that's how you say his name. He worked at Netscape. It was developed in 10 days. Think about what you did 10 days ago. Or think about what's 10 days from now. It's going to be, what, not this Sunday, the next, or next 2 Saturdays from now. Imagine you create an entire language. So next time someone starts bashing on JavaScript, say, hey, I want to know how well of a language you could have made in 10 days, right? Next thing, Netscape and Sun's Lab joined forces against Microsoft. So why this is important is, so remember, Brandon, you worked for Netscape, right? And so right now, this was happening during the early browser wars. You had Microsoft, you had Internet Explorer, Netscape, you had a few other browsers, and they're all pretty much fighting for what's going to be the main browser. Little did they know this thing called Chrome was going to be coming out later, but for right now, they have no idea, right? So they're all fighting. So Netscape and Sun's Lab, given the fact that they're much smaller than Microsoft, they actually joined forces. Like, okay, hey, we need to have this. This is actually the next slide. So why was it made? To make a browser, interactive, right? And so they joined forces to create JavaScript. Or JavaScript was created here, and then they later joined Sun Labs. Kind of joined the cause. Like, okay, let's plain JavaScript. Like, this is what we're going with. This is where we're putting all our Easter eggs in. Let's go with that, because that's the only way we're going to be able to compete with Microsoft and whatever monster they come out with, right? So, by the way, this whole what's going on, like, this really should be its own talk. That's the reason why I'm briefly going over it. Like, I could spend probably like another 2 hours talking about it. Just knows a lot of information. Don't worry, the names for you to look into, like Brandon, and then another one. Don't worry, it's going to be later on in the slides. But this is really, really interesting what happened here. And I feel everyone should know this, but don't worry for today. Just know a few of these items, right? And like this next one right here. Sun's Lab claimed ownership of the JavaScript trademark. So why is that important? Well, this is why the standard's called ECMAScript and not JavaScript. So meaning you have like ES5, ES6, ES7. There's a reason why it's not JS5 or JavaScript 1, JavaScript 5, JavaScript 6. Like we have like Ruby 1, Ruby 2, Swift 1, Swift 2, right? So because Sun's Lab had claimed ownership of it, whenever Netscape went to standardize the language, well, they ended up at the European Computer Manufacturers Association. Don't worry, like I said, there's some things that you'll be able to learn at a later time, fortunately. And they couldn't call it JavaScript. And so they ended up falling on the decision that, like, let's call it ECMAScript. And so for the longest time, me as a JavaScript developer, I'm like, what is ES5? Like, I was just been doing JavaScript. All of a sudden, people were talking about this ECMAScript. Like, what is it? It's the same exact thing. The only reason why it's not, it's JavaScript, ECMAScript, JScript. It's all the same thing. Trademark's the reason why we can't call it JavaScript. I don't know what it is now. Like, that's still the case, but that's the reason why we are where we are now. So this is a bit of a timeline. Don't worry, you don't have to know what's going on here, but just know, from 1999 all the way to, I think it goes down to 2016. A lot happens here, right? So we have like the creation of some of these browsers, as well as some frameworks. HTML5, Angular is somewhere there. I know I saw it earlier. We have Rails, jQuery here over here in 2006. So just know there's a lot that's going on. By the way, like right now we're kind of like circling this area here, right? But just keep in mind 2006. That's a pretty important year for a JavaScript developer. So just keep that in the back of your mind. So before time, right? So like I said, these are some items that aren't in any particular order. Like I said, this is just material that I would like for you to know before we get to the framework era. So Web 1.0, what did that mean? No dynamic content. If you know what that means, don't worry. Web 2.0 will explain that. I didn't know what it meant. JavaScript and CSS are still, little babies. They don't really they still don't know who they are, what they do really. And the major players were Netscape and Internet Explorer. And to kind of give you some context, I bet you're trying to wonder, like, what was I doing in 1990? Or like, what was happening? What can I kind of like, attach myself with and remember what it felt like to be in the 1990s? Well, around this time, Ben Stiller was filming Happy Gilmore. So in case next time you see this movie, just remember, oh hey, Web 1.0, that was at the same time. So the next one, Web 2.0, right? So it added dynamic HTML. It means JavaScript and CSS can manipulate the DOM. Like, cool, like that's React in a nutshell, really, right? So this was in the early 2000s. Drag and drop animation, some examples are gonna be like Amazon, Wikipedia, YouTube. So this is in the 2000s, right? So you can kind of remember, like, okay, what can I attach myself to remember, like, oh, this is when Web 2.0 came out. Well, that's when Starsky and Hutch came out, all right? So next time you see that movie, it really takes place in the 70s, right, or 60s, I think 70s. Just know that, oh, Web 2.0 was around around the same time. So this is now, okay, like I said, nothing's in any particular order. It's just information that I needed to bring to your attention. So ECMAScript, right? So now we have, this is really, really cool. I learned this while doing research for this presentation. So V3, 1999, right? V4, there's a reason why you don't hear ES4, right? I don't know if you ever looked into it, but it doesn't exist. It was abandoned, actually, right? So then you have V5 in 2009. Look how there's a 10-year gap here, right? Look at the dates. I'm starting to make, remember 2006, right? Like all these, playing detective here, right? V5, 2009, 5.1, 2011. This is actually pretty important as well. When you use the use strict in your JavaScript, that's actually the standard that they fall on. It falls on version 5.1, that standard. So some of the ugly parts of JavaScript that they really want to do away with actually gets declared here in 5.1. Then you have V6, V7, VN, you kind of know from there. But there's all this ES stuff, right? So remember, it's ECMAScript only because Sun's Lab had the trademark to be, had the JavaScript trademark. So whenever they had to create the standard for it, they're like, okay, well, let's just call it ECMAScript. Very confusing. I'm not gonna lie, I didn't learn it until I did this presentation. So then now, okay, that was some information that you know, right? Remember those dates I was talking about, right? Now let's enter the browser wars, right? And so this graph actually ends in 2008, which is when Chrome was created. I think you can kind of know what happened from there as far as, who was winning or who started winning from there. But let's not gonna lie, I couldn't find one that had 1990, from the 90s all the way till today. So I had to just, this was more important at the time, of course. So just know 2008, Chrome got created, things changed again. But okay, this is the timeline from 1994 to 2008, right? If we look back this time, 99, 2009, right? Timelines are starting to line up here, right? So this is what I found very interesting. I'm going to go ahead and read it to you. Having 10 years in which nothing happened allowed for the language to become stable. Douglas Crockford. And so what he was talking about was this right here. I was talking about browser wars, right? What was happening then was all these browsers, Firefox, Internet Explorer, Netscape, they're still figuring things out, especially in the JavaScript world, especially now. Okay, if you thought browser compatibility was bad now, back then was worse. What would have made things 10 times worse is if we had new versions of JavaScript as these browsers are trying to, figure things out and try to make things compatible, right? So it was good. It's great that we didn't have a ES4 because that would have, I don't even know what would have happened. We might have been writing the front end in Java or C or something. I don't know, but just know that these browser wars, the ECMAScript, it all kind of ties in together. I would have hated to work on JavaScript during this time because it's just a headache. So let's get. So now, okay, that was some information, right? Like I said, you just needed to know that as we're getting into not this section, but the next. Oh. So now we're at the before time. So the before time, I want you to think we're not the frameworks yet. We're not at jQuery. We're just in vanilla JavaScript, right? So some terms that I want you to know are server-side rendering and client-side rendering. So with server-side rendering, the logic existed. I'm going to explain these two. So server-side rendering, logic existed on the back end. It's very expensive. What I want you to think of, you can rewind the clocks real quick to the early MySpace days or late MySpace days, early Facebook days, where you're standing there in your profile and you're waiting for a new notification, and you're like, okay, Command R, let me refresh it, right? And all of a sudden, boom, you have a new comment or something, right? But you wouldn't have seen it unless you refreshed it, right? That's server-side rendering. That means everything that you see on the screen is actually being computed or created on the server, and the server then spits that to your browser, right? Then you have client-side rendering. Client-side, the logic exists on the client. This is what we are experiencing now. This is what React, Angular, Vue, all that, to where you check to see, okay, is the user logged in? If the user's logged in, let me show them this view. Is the user not logged in? Okay, I'm going to show them the login screen. That used to happen on the server. Now it happens on the client. The reason why it was expensive, let's pretend you have your little website that unfortunately is just you and your mom that visit, right? And that's not really that expensive. But if you think about Facebook or some of these major, YouTube, they did server-side rendering. Imagine having to spit out for millions of requests every single day, the entire web page. It's pretty expensive. So that's the reason why client-side exists. So like I said, this is going to come into play later. This is important when we start talking about Ajax. So we have a Meetup example, or excuse me, I made an example to kind of illustrate this. So in here we have it's a bootstrap template. I had an edit user. Let's pretend this is a social network that you're building, right? And this is your accounts page where you update your username or something like that. I don't know, right? And then also we have a sidebar, and do see that we have init Fabian, here. By the way, that's my Twitter handler, GitHub. That's how you contact me. I probably should have put that in the slide. Sorry. Init Fabian's here on the sidebar, in the body, the main content, and also in the nav bar over there on the far right. It was like, hi, init Fabian. You kind of see that sometimes, right? So we have it throughout the web page, correct? If we did server-side rendering, let's pretend. So this just makes don't worry. Like, I want you, if you can imagine what what it is that I'm pointing at, then that's fine. Just know that this is a span with the class of username info. This is important. This for later on, but I just want to say, like, okay, this is hard coded in the P tag, like my name, right? And so this is server-side rendered. What would end up happening is when you hit update on the form, which is right here, think of an HTML form, right? Just before client-side rendering, whenever you hit the submit or an update, what end up happening is the form gets sent up to the server, and then the server responds back with hey, you forgot to fill in this field. So if you've experienced when you're, when you're filling out like a 10-field, form online to sign up or something, more than likely probably government forms whenever this happens, and then all of a sudden you hit submit, all the page refreshes and a small little error box says, hey, you forgot to fill in the zip code and all your text fields are empty. You gotta do it all over again. That's server-side rendering. That's what's gonna happen here. Whenever I hit update, it's gonna go up to the server's gonna spit back an HTML page, and if it updates my name, it's gonna update in all three locations, the sidebar, the main body, and the nav bar. So now let's talk about client-side rendering. So we have the XML HTTP request. This is, like I said, this is straight vanilla JavaScript. True story, I've never actually was able to make this work. When I was learning JavaScript and I didn't know what jQuery was or what Bootstrap is, right? And I just saw this and I'm following this Bucky's the new Boston's tutorial and I could never get it to work to save my life. I don't know if it was browsers or what, but I end up let me just copy this jQuery thing, and they have this Ajax. Well, we're going to talk about that later, but just know that, this is vanilla JavaScript at its best. So XML HTTP request, aka Ajax, it stands for asynchronous JavaScript in XML. That's what Ajax stands for. I've actually never parsed a XML file in my life, but that's what it stands for. It's actually misleading. This was on W3 School. Ajax is a misleading name. Ajax applications might use XML to transport data, but it is equally common to transport data as plain text or JSON. So it's a misleading name, but Ajax is all you really got to know. Like I said, so what Ajax allowed us to do, let's go and talk about that, is it allowed us to communicate to a server without having to refresh the entire page. So whenever you hit submit, what we can instead of having to submit the entire form, we can just hit this function here. We can communicate to the server or to the URL, which is right down here, and we can pass in all this mumbo jumbo. You don't really need to know what's going on. Just know that, okay, this is vanilla JavaScript, Ajax at its barest. This is what it looks like. Another thing to note, Safari did not, and this is where, remember those dates I was talking about? Safari didn't implement this until 1.2, and that was in 2004. Opera did it in Opera 8 in 2005, and Internet Explorer did it in 2006. Right? So let's see. I just want you to remember those dates. All right. So now we have this form again, right? So now with our vanilla JavaScript, when you hit update, what we can instead do is we just run this JavaScript function. What this JavaScript function would do is communicate to the server, hey, is it okay to update their name, right? And the server says, okay, yes, here's the updated name. And then in one of these functions down here, it's like line 6, no, you can't see it. What I do is I get the element by class name, username, info, and I set the inner HTML to the updated username. That's all I did. And so that will then update it throughout my entire application. Cool, right? Now, let's talk about the framework era. This is where things start getting juicy, really juicy. So this is just a timeline I wanted to show you, right? Look at the dates again. So 99, 2004, nothing happens in 2005. 2006, this thing called jQuery comes out, right? If you remember all those timelines, all those dates? 2006 is where the magic happened. I don't know where I was at in 2006, to be honest. I think I was in middle school, but I know it wasn't nowhere near a keyboard to develop. And then, I have the rest, right? But I just want to show you there's a timeline that exists. So, the framework era. What is a framework? So, it's a library. That's all it is. It's a way to help you organize applications, right? Imagine if you didn't have a framework and you did it your own way with vanilla JavaScript. When you came and looked at my applications and I did it my own way, things look very different. You wouldn't know what's going on. So fortunately, frameworks allow us to have some sort of common ground. We standardization help collaborate, and more importantly, and this is a really good point, cross-platform compatibility. As you wrote your own web before jQuery, if you wrote your own website, you needed to make an API request when all those other browsers didn't implement the HTTP or XML HTTP request, you would have a lot of trouble, right? So having frameworks allowed us to have that cross-platform, allowed us to work on all the browsers. It made code more reusable, right? It was really nice to just be able to go to your old project or on Stack Overflow, I don't even know if it existed yet, and just copy the answer, paste, and boom, it worked, right? So that's what frameworks allowed us to do. And then also allow us to build out communities and have some great tutorials. Right? It's really hard to learn, to learn how to do some of these things without a framework, especially in JavaScript, because if you go to one tutorial, it's going to be done one way, and you go to another one, completely done a separate way. I still experience that today, especially when I was like learning Node, but it's another day. So now we're at our first battle, right? You've made it this far. First blood. Oh, it doesn't come out as smooth. But this is from Tropic Thunder. This is Ben Stiller. He's drawing first blood, right? He's having some fun with his machine gun. So let's choose a side. You have Prototype, you have Dojo, you have Moot Tools, and then jQuery. Spoiler alert, jQuery wins. We're not going to talk about all of them. We're going to talk about jQuery. I don't care about the losers, just jQuery. So jQuery, released in 2006, remember the dates, simplified JavaScript tasks, things such as applying styles, animations, DOM manipulation, and then more importantly, AJAX. Like, if you can think about it, server or client-side rendering, aka the XML, HTTP request, that didn't really happen a lot until jQuery came out, right? And so when we saw jQuery as a developer, I didn't see it, but I'm assuming when the JavaScript developers of the time, when they saw it, they probably thought, that's blue steel, all right? This thing is magic. So let's talk about Ajax, right? Because all the other stuff, you kind of already know what's going on, especially when you're doing React. Like what you see, it's influenced heavily by jQuery. So this is really like the grandfather of it all. So let's talk about Ajax. Remember, this is what it looked like. Really, really ugly. Yeah, I really don't want to see this. That's what it turned into. That looks very similar to what you're used to, like in, please pronounce Axiom. I've never used it, but this is what you see in HTTP with Node. When you see the $sign HTTP in Angular. So this Ajax, very influential to all the future frameworks moving forward, right? So next time someone wants to challenge you on something, you just bring that up, even if it's irrelevant. If you're talking about cats or the rockets, just point this and be like, look, this is what I know. What do you know? So jQuery, another important are the events. This is, like I said, this really did shape frameworks moving forward. So what this is this pound that we have here in front of us, it's an ID on an HTML element. And what it's saying, whenever this element submits, I want you to run this function. So if this was a form, all you had to do was put an ID on it, and you could attach this listener. Very similar to what we see now. And so here is, you can get the value, instead of doing get element by ID, you put in the ID, and you do .inner HTML, all that vanilla JavaScript. That turns into this right here. Pound updated username field .val. Boom, you got your inputted text field, and we're just console logging it. Well, let's combine the two. Let's combine that event listener that we just saw and also that new Ajax. That turned the code into this. It's really, really small. Like I said, you really don't have to know exactly what's going on. Like I said, slides presentation can be uploaded afterwards. Really kind of small, but just know it really shrunk down. Submitting a form, and it made it very reusable moving forward. Then peace was brought to the galaxy. All was well. We were like, okay, we're done. Like, man, that was a brutal battle, but the internet seems like it's not going to be changing anytime soon, right? And then the monolithic melee happened, and a lot of people were lost. By the way, he's not really getting shot. It's from Tropic. If you can imagine, all my war scenes are from Tropic Thunder, unfortunately, but they just really exaggerate the amount of times he got shot. He got shot like 10 more times before this. So before we start talking about the actual frameworks, there's something, there's a topic that you need to go over. It's a thing called MVC. Actually, coming from iOS, I deal with MVC a lot. And so it's kind of biased for me to be up here because I'm kind of on one side. I dislike it. But anyways, pretend you didn't hear that, and we're going to talk about all the frameworks like the rest of the world saw them when they were released. The golden, silver bullets that they all were. So MVC, it's an architectural pattern, not a design pattern. These are some topics. This is some material that I want y'all to look into later on, or whenever you're bored, you're like, okay, I want to know about something cool in programming. Architectural patterns, design patterns, two very different things. So architectural patterns are a way for you to separate your code base in this case into either models, views, or controls. It needs to fall under one of those three classes or one of those three components. You have things like services, you have all these other, but MVC states that you will have a model, a view, and a controller. And the way that information flows through them, it's not very clear. Don't worry, we'll get into that later, but just know whenever the JavaScript developers at the time saw that and like, wow, this is amazing, because we've had jQuery, right? But whenever I want to store user email or user full name or information or state of the user, I don't have anywhere to store it. Like, it'd be really nice for me to have things like, such a thing as a model or a controller for me to like be able to separate my code in a way to where I can store user information, over here and be able to manipulate the DOM and, pump my data into the view, all, with ease instead of doing it jQuery way. jQuery, like I said, it was more of a utilities tool for you to manipulate the DOM. It really wasn't made to maintain user state or to be able to handle user state management. Or say it's not good for state management. It's another term for you to look into later on. So MVC, it helped with a separation of concern. These are some programming, programming jargon or buzzwords. And so it just means that your code really should be separated into a presentation layer, a business layer, or a data layer. All right. If it doesn't fall in one of those three, then you're doing something wrong. That's what MVC really likes to say in some way, but I don't agree with it. Don't worry, Redux and all that answers it. Don't worry. Make sure I cover everything. And so, by the way, okay, so you want to make sure that your views and your controllers and your models are not tightly coupled, meaning if I were to copy this controller and paste it in this other project, that it's not going to complain or throw errors saying like, hey, I don't know what this model that you're talking about, right? So MVC, it really wants you to decouple your code, but isn't necessarily the case. So let's choose a side. So we're in the monolithic melee here. So we got Backbone.js, we got Ember, we got Angular. There are a few others, but these were, for the most part, were the three big players, right? And the developers at the time all thought, this is all blue steel here, all right? This is what we're looking for. So let's use an example. Let's use a to-do list. I mean, whenever you're learning a new language, one of the first things that you do is create a to-do list app. So we're going to break down this app as MVC. So for sure, we know that our entire website, our entire view, like that is a view, right? So therefore, because we have a view here, we need to have a controller, and we need to have a model. Even if we don't have anything in it, you need to have it, right? So we have a view, meaning we have a controller for the parent class. Then we also have an MVC here with the to-do list. So we actually have a list, and that means, okay, we're going to have a list, it's going to have a table, right? And we're just going to feed it in a model, an array of to-dos, and it's going to display it on its view. And then lastly, we have a to-do, right? To-do will have its own view, which is going to be a row. It's going to have its own controller to be able to handle, the delete on the right-hand side or the is complete on the left-hand side. So it looks like we have like MVC all the way down, right? It looks really organized. Like, it looks good. Like, if I can build this, near spec with MVC, and I don't think I'm breaking any kind of any code conventions or any laws, right? The thing about MVC that you need to know is, remember the term I mentioned, separation of concerns, and also there's another term called single responsibility principle. What it means is your code should only be in charge of one thing, and that's it, right? So we have we have an app controller that's controlling the entire app, right? But it doesn't have control over the items inside of the list controller, right? It only needs to worry about the entire view, anything that happens there, right? And so as you get smaller and smaller, the to-do controller, the actual row, should not communicate back up to its parent, or the to-do list controller should not communicate down or up. Like, you should just have, like I said, single responsibility principle. It's part of this solid programming term, I forget what's the acronym. That's something for you to look into later if you want. So let's look at how all these frameworks would do it. So this is Backbone. It doesn't actually follow MVC, so sorry I lied to you. There's no controllers. You have a model and you have a view/controller. But already a red flag kind of, a red flag gets thrown up with the events over here on line 4. It's a view. Look at line 1, backbone.view.extend, right? Then you have events, meaning this view is handling events, which, as we remember, a view should only be single responsibility principle, should only be responsible for displaying the data, and that's it. The controller should be in charge of handling events and how it should mutate the view, or if it needs to update the model. So already, this is going on. Okay, well, hey, the developers at the time didn't know that. That's fine. As an iOS developer, I know this. I hate MVC. We deal with this all the time. Actually, in iOS, MVC stands for Massive View Controller. So it's kind of funny how we just kind of throw everything in the controller. That's a real thing. If you Google it, you will find it. So now let's talk about Ember. Ember by far is the closest to MVC. So you have a model, you have the view, and it actually uses handlebar.js to render out its views. And so it just means it allows you to put JavaScript inside of your XML or inside of your HTML. Then you have the controller. This actually looks really good. I don't have anything bad to say. I don't have any experience with Backbone or Ember. Angular I do. But so from what I see, it's actually pretty good. Now we have Angular. I actually before doing React, I had done Angular for probably, I would say, like 3 years. I made all my websites. I even made a website for a client in Angular, and I'm looking to change that to React. But so what made Angular interesting is that two-way data binding. I don't necessarily know if Backbone and Ember had that out the box, at least the way that Angular did. But what it meant is, if let's say you had a text field and you're inputting information, and you had a label, or you had a p tag, some text over here, you can set up your controller to where whatever you type inside the text field, the label or the text on the other side will update. That was really cool. I remember when I first saw that, I'm like, that is awesome. I love Angular. Not really knowing what was going to happen later on. Because when you have a simple to-do list that's gold. But once you get into a real-life application, which we will in a bit, you're going to see how that backfires pretty quick. So the thing about Angular, I don't know if anyone here has experience with it, or for those who don't. So this was another thing that I didn't know. A lot of developers didn't know the problem at the time. So this is my to-do, right? It's open bracket, my dash to-do, snake case, right? Well, that's how you use it, right? And this is the directive, this is the HTML, this is the component that you're used to seeing in React, right? So you just have a small bit of HTML, and whenever you use, this HTML element, it's just going to replace this with that. Sorry, I don't know why it took me so long to say, but it's just. And so now, in order for your JavaScript to know that it exists, you need to have a directive. And what this tells the JavaScript program is like, hey, you're going to have a file on line 5 that says it's going to be to-do.tpl.html. That whole TPL, that was my own personal preferences. I like to subcategorize my files. So it knows that it's looking for that file, and remember how this is my dash to do? Well, over here on line 2, it's actually camel case. That was one of the worst things in Angular that I felt. Like I always, whenever a directive or a component didn't, show up on the view, the very first thing is I probably messed up on my naming, because in JavaScript it needs to be camel case, but in HTML it needs to be snake case. That was the worst thing. And then what sucked is whenever I would go back to Angular, I would always forget, and I would just be going in through Stack Overflow, then realizing 20 minutes later that I need to do that. And then finally you have a controller. As you see, there is no model. There's no models. It's just views and controllers. And at the time, I didn't really know what MVC was, so I didn't really know I was supposed to have it. But if I was going into Angular today, I would think to myself, where do I store my data? There's a huge learning curve. I remember that. I would fight against my Angular programs, or I felt like say like weeks until finally things started clicking. You started learning things the Angular way. And then, so views, there's just a lot of work. So of the of the 4 screens you see here, 3 of them belong to just views. Like you got to do all this just for a view. I didn't know that was a lot of work at the time. I had just, learned what jQuery was. Yeah, that was Angular. So let's do a real-world application, right? So let's just disregard the names. Just like, okay, Ember, Backbone, and Angular, right? And these were, when I say monolithic frameworks, what I meant is that these are all-in-one solution for you, okay? That means with React's very good about like, oh, if you want to use jQuery with React, it can work. It can work in Angular. It can work with just regular plain vanilla JavaScript. But with these other frameworks, for example, with Meteor, if you had a Meteor project, if you wanted to use something, I'm just going to throw a framework under the bus here, but let's say you wanted to use underscore, right? You needed to find the Meteor version of underscore. You couldn't just throw in any JavaScript class or any JavaScript library in with your monolithic framework. Oh, I remember with Angular, if you had jQuery, things broke all the time. So real world application, right? Don't worry, we're not going to look at any code, right? So let's break down this example using the MVC architecture. So we're just going to bring it centered. We have one MVC here, right? So we have the main body. Then we have another MVC here on the sidebar, right? So that way it can handle, my name here. Let's say this friends had like parentheses and it said like, oh, you have 400 friends, right? So it had a controller for all this information and a controller for all this information here in the main body. Oh, and then also we need a controller for the nav bar too, right? So like, all right, cool. Like I was able to split up my application into these sections, and it looks good. Yeah. Well. Okay, well now let's go. Let's implement some of the code for me to update the text or update the username, right? There's no models. Remember that. Okay, when I hit update, it updates it here, but oh wait, y'all see the problem? I need to update it over here in this controller and also in the nav bar, but then that breaks our single responsibility principle that we had mentioned earlier. Like the controller shouldn't communicate to other controllers. It shouldn't communicate up. So if let's say we had a parent controller around this controller should not communicate back to the parent for the parent then to tell the other one. Like that's already, we're in a bad spot. We're like, okay, you know what, all right, fine. I'm just gonna do this one time. 4 hours later, you're gonna do it about 10 more times, and then 2 months later, you're going to be coming across some code, you're gonna come across a bug, you're like, how does this even happen? Not realizing that you have this thing called side effects that are happening in your code. When you update it here, all of a sudden you have a side effect on the other side of your application that updates, and you're just like, I don't know where this bug came from. So this is the problem that you come across with MVC, especially in JavaScript and especially with iOS. So let's rewind real quick. During this, while you're developing this application and your MVC monolithic framework, you're thinking you're like this. You're having fun. Everything's awesome. Everything's groovy, right? Not really knowing what you were doing is this. You just set yourself up to fail so bad, like as I did with my Angular application. That is gasoline. Now the next scene is when things go up in flames, but they didn't have a GIF that had all of it. So, or else I would have put it there. Let's see it one more time. Okay, so the issues, to go back, controllers get bloated because really they're in between the models and the views. So, by nature, we want to just like, oh, we'll just throw this in this controller, not really thinking that like, oh, it really needs to be somewhere else. But wait, it needs to either be a model, a view, or a controller. So I kind of don't know where to put this. Things like, oh, I need to make a quick API call to, send up, analytics or something, right? As soon as you do that, you broke the single responsibility principle. Your controller should only control what it is, I guess, classified, or whatever component it is in charge of. But also data bindings. Data binding's bad. At least for me, every single time someone says like observable, to me it kind of like gives me a, I start getting this pain in the back of my neck when I hear observables. It's not a bad word or anything, and it's still used very much today. There's very valid use cases, but I just automatically think about two-way data binding, and I just remember, the headaches that came with that. But Don't let that discourage you. Like, well, Fabian, I followed the diagram. Like, well, how come it's not working? Well, the thing is, MVC, if you remember the photo that you saw earlier, that was this top one. And if you look at the arrows, the way they're communicating is one way, right? But if you look at these other ones, these are still MVC patterns. As you can kind of see, there really is no set standard on how your application communicates between your models, your views, and your controllers. So for example, this view actually observes the model and it communicates back to the controller, but then also the controller communicates down to the model, which is being observed by the view. The controller also updates, wait, what? This is what I'm talking about. Like there is, especially when you look at Apple's documentation and bring up model view controller, it's an idea that us developers fell in love with, not really understanding the repercussions of it, because we really don't have a set standard of this is the way you communicate. And also when MVC was created, I believe it was created Smalltalk, or with Smalltalk, it's a programming language back in the 70s, I believe. Back then, the things such as the internet didn't exist, web browsers, like MVC was meant to be, very small components. Like I feel when we were developing out these frameworks, or when we had this problem, we just like, oh well, MVC, like we have a model view control. Let's just use that. I personally don't believe it was meant for its use case today, but that's to be seen. So lastly, my other issues that I had, and this is what React answered for me. Look at the way the HTML is. Like it really does. This isn't valid HTML. When you see ng repeat, if this is a string like framework and frameworks, like that's not valid HTML at all. What this does is this does a loop. So this is a problem that I had. I'm sure we'll go over. And so when we talk about React in the next section, know that the standard or the best practice was to have your HTML in a separate file than your JavaScript. Having HTML in your JavaScript was bad. You didn't do that. If you did that, that was a rookie. So now we're at the clash of the components. This is the war that we're in now, people. Prepare yourself. I don't care if you're tired, all right? You need to get up and continue moving. So, clash of the components. We got React, Vue, and Polymer. We're just going to talk about React, not just because, we're in a React Meetup, but it has nothing to do with the fact that I don't have any experience with Vue or Polymer either, but it's mostly because we're in a React Meetup, right? So, with React, it was announced in JSConf 2013. As you see, it's underlined. If you have not seen this conference, or at least the announcement of it, I suggest you do so. It's it's crazy whenever you see the announcement of some of these things. It's like when I don't know if you ever rewatched the announcement of the iPhone. Like it was crazy seeing people's reaction whenever they did the pinch to zoom. People lost it. They're like, oh my God, it's amazing, right? Well, that was the same thing happened in 2013. Now it's normal to us, but back then it was groundbreaking, right? So React, it discourages mutation. It renders a DOM like a server-side rendered. If you remember server-side rendering, as we mentioned, right? Like you hit the server and the server re-renders the entire page. Well, kind of similar to that if you think about it, right? Just only running on your client. And code becomes more predictable. Since you break everything down in such a way to where, okay, it's just the view, right? And we stepped away from the, one size fit all, or a solution for all your problems with the whole monolithic era. Now we're in just the view. Okay, I want to decide how I architect my code. And so back in the JSConf 2013, this was the actual slide that was used. And as Tom Occhino, at least how you pronounce his last name, Tom Occhino, don't worry, this is going to be the later slide. I watched all his talks. He's a very good presenter, but really interesting stuff. So they said that we took a huge step backwards in terms of the maintainability of our code simply because we were embedding markup inside of our JavaScript. So remember that slide I showed you before where the HTML was separated from the JavaScript? Well, that was because that's what the standard was for years. React completely just made everyone rethink the way things were done, and they actually had people tweeting saying that, what the hell is Facebook doing? Like, what is this? This is bad. And then entered Redux, right, or Flux, right? Because it discouraged mutation, this is actually a functional, Redux was inspired by the Elm architecture, which is a unidirectional data flow. These are just terms, this is jargon terms, which just means that, like, okay, the whole two-way data binding, that doesn't exist anymore. Whenever you mutate something or you change something, you make an announcement, and this announcement then goes to a reducer, and then a reducer goes down to the store, and the store updates, and then that causes a re-render, right? The way that the flow, it's actually going to be the next slide. This is a unidirectional flow of data. You hear the term called pure functions. What that means is you never mutate the object that's being, input into the function. You always return a new object. So the Redux is a unidirectional data flow influenced by the Elm architecture. And go over. Make sure. Okay, and so when we update things like state, this is why React is so scalable, right? With MVC, or you had other previous frameworks, you end up having these, you'll go really, really fast building up, right? And all of a sudden you reach a plateau. And no matter what, you have the, I think it's the, someone correct me, it's not the nth man or whatever that goes to where, like, once you add people, you actually start slowing down. I forgot the term, someone remembers. But with this, as Tom Okino had mentioned, they actually sped up creating features because code becomes more predictable with React and Redux or Flux. Sure, talk about your function. Okay. So now, what's next? Like, what do I think is next? Like I said, this is, I guess it's subjective. I'm an iOS developer, for one. I actually think something that I learned really early on is that history repeats itself, no matter what. Whether it's in programming, in human nature, history always repeats itself. Right now, we're going crazy over these, functional way of programming. Well, that existed a long time ago, way before I was born. So why are we now making a big deal about it? Simply do is we grab something that's already existed and we, wrap it up and call it something new. And we throw, an electron or a neutron symbol on it. It's like, boom, create a new framework, right? So let's just think about, like, okay, we went through this utilities framework. We went through the MVC era, and then now we're at the Vue, right? I personally feel the next thing that's going to go is going to be data. Not go, but I mean what's going to be reinvented is data. I'm hoping, or predicting, I don't know, that we will move away from APIs and start moving towards WebSockets, things, because right now the world is all about real time, right? Like, I want to get a notification, I want it now. Okay? APIs don't really give me that unless I do, constant polling of my API. So I feel WebSockets is going to be the way, right? We're going to, instead of updating user information through an API, we're actually going to send it off through a WebSocket and update it right then. It's going to update all y'all's phones. So that's one thing that I'm assuming we're going to go. As far as, like, who's going to come out winning from the component, clash of the components, I honestly think it's going to be React. Not because I'm in a React meetup, but because coming from the iOS space, I know how much work goes into just creating an iOS app in terms of, like, there's a reason why PhoneGap or Cordova don't work. It's because, and why React has become so successful with React Native, it's because React Native actually communicates down to the JavaScript core library, and it's a library inside of iOS that allows Objective-C or Swift code to execute JavaScript and vice versa, right? So that's how React Native in a nutshell works. So Vue and Polymer, they got a long way to go if they even think they're going to be competing with React Native in the future, right? And so I feel that since everything's moving in mobile, that as a developer, I imagine in 5 years now, a single JavaScript developer will be able to create applications for, of course, the web, mobile, using React Native, actual platforms using either React Native or something like Electron. So that's where I feel that that's going. And so, like I mentioned, like, history repeats itself, right? So with that, you see, yeah, in fact, I'll just leave it at that. So the last thing is topics and people, right? So the people that I really find influential, the people that I like watching talks over when I go on YouTube and it has, like, the recommended, if I see Tom Okino's name, I'm stopping what I'm doing and I'm watching this video. Really good presenter. So he's the manager of the React team, right? Pete Hunt is also part of the React team. He has some really good presentations, especially during the 2013, 2015. Those presentations were really good because that's whenever the JavaScript world was really changing to how we know it today. So Brandon Ike, he's actually the creator of JavaScript. Robert Uncle Bob Martin. This guy is amazing. He's funny too. If you want to know about architecture, you want to learn about things like MVVM, MVC, MVP, talk about things called Vipers and iOS. Anything like architecture, you want to start like getting, want to become not only a better developer, but really understanding and be able to talk the jargon. Robert Uncle Bob Martin is your guy. John Reed, he actually comes from an iOS background, but most of his presentations go over concepts like, architecture, test-driven development. He is very good, and they all talk about MVC, not in the negative light that I did, but they explain, since they were alive during its creation, they explain what its actual intent was. Lastly, like Douglas Crawford, he is actually just started watching while creating this presentation. He actually kind of goes hand in hand with Brandon Ike. A lot of his talks are on the early days of JavaScript. This is where I learned a lot of the browser wars and what ECMAScript, how that all kind of transpired. Topics, and like I said, I'm going to be posting this on the web for you to later click on or later do research on. But the topics: unidirectional data flow, architectures in JavaScript, and some must-watch videos for all JavaScript, especially React developers, are the should have been white. I'm sorry. This is like ugly yellow. That's really hard to see, but it's going to be the JSConf 2013, and that's when React was being announced. And then also the Hacker's Way Rethinking Web Development at Facebook. This was eye-opening. I remember whenever I was applying this, these type of architectures like Redux and Flux to iOS. I didn't really understand it. I just knew it was what I needed for my team. So these videos really did help me understand what was going on, how we got to where we are today. So last off, we're gonna end it. Does anyone have any questions?